Hello and welcome back to the No Dig Norfolk Gardener. Now, how would you like some nutrient-rich organic feed for free? Now, you can buy chemical fertilizers and feed for your plants, but we like to garden organically here, and actually things that you have in the garden or that you could possibly have in your garden could give you a good source of organic, rich in nutrient feed, and it won't cost you a penny. Now, earlier in the year I was asked by several people the sort of feed that we were using in the greenhouse, because that's predominantly where I use this feed. And as I replied back, I'm saying it's some Comfrey feed, which is homemade, which we make. I was then asked several times by people if I could make a video on how to make that Comfrey feed. We made the video. Now, Comfrey is really good for making feed because Comfrey is one of those plants where its roots are very deep rooted, much more deeply than any vegetable you'll grow in most plants. It goes well below the top piece of soil that you have and into ground where other plants just don't go. And because it has these lovely big leaves, that's because all those nutrients they're taking up below the ground and deep from the ground is going into these leaves. Now, by harvesting these leaves, you can make yourself a nutrient-rich, organic feed for your plants. Now, in particular, Comfrey leaves are high in potassium. Potassium is something that promotes flower growth, which ultimately then produced really good fruits. And you'll know, if you're a follower of this channel, that the only place that we use any kind of feed is in the greenhouse. The other vegetable beds don't receive anything other than the compost that we feed the soil with. But in the greenhouse, I regard it, because everything is so tightly packed in there and there's so much coming out of that, that it can do with a good feed. But again, I don't want to be using artificial fertilizers or feeds. Where I can, I want to be using my own, and that's why we make the Comfrey feed. And you probably saw earlier in the year just how good the tomato harvest was, the aubergines, the peppers, they were all really good. And they're only fed every now and again with our Comfrey feed. Now, to make Comfrey feed, you shall need a pair of gloves, and that's quite important because these leaves, although it won't pick it up on film, but they're quite hairy and they can be quite toxic to some people's skin and really irritate you. Now, clearly you're going to need some Comfrey leaves, and you're going to need a bucket or a trug of some description. Some people like to use tubs that have lids on it, because the one thing you will notice when you make it is that it doesn't smell too pleasant. If you are using a trug or a tub, you're also going to need a brick or a heavy stone of some description so that you can weight the leaves down into the water that you're going to add with it. Then, of course, a watering can with some water in it that you can pour over the leaves. Now, just because we can, myself and Mrs. W often, well, we don't often, we do. We use this old watering can. It doesn't get used for putting water in it anymore. We actually put the Comfrey leaves in there and then pour the water over, leave it there until it's ready. And as you saw at the beginning of the video, I was pouring the contents out into the bottle. So this was made a little earlier this year. So you want to be gathering clearly some Comfrey leaves. If it was earlier in the year and you were doing this the first time of the season, because you can harvest the leaves while they're there. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is, but in particular in spring, you'll find that it will flower. So if this was spring and it had flowers on them, just take the flowers off. All we're interested in is the leaves. And again, if it's a tall variety and you're cutting and it's got stems on it, the tough stems want to be cut off too. It's the leaves that essentially have all of those lovely nutrients in it. Whatever vessel you're using, ensure that they are packed tightly inside, as we have done so here. And then all you need to do now is to cover it with water. So that's our stone in there, and it just tells me now that I need to put a little bit more water in it. And that's just covered. A bit like cooking your ham, just cover it. Now, clearly, if you want to make this feed, you're going to need a comfrey bush. And what comfrey is, it can be really quite evasive. So be careful as to where you plant it. Ours is planted here. Now, this is a spot that Mrs. W wanted to make what she calls her stumpery. And that's where this comfrey has gone. It is controlled here, so it can't come out and grow into anything else. It's contained well within this little bed here, under an old apple tree that was here when we first got here, but was quite damaged. But we didn't have the heart to take the tree down, so it's been converted into Mrs. W's stumpery. And what will happen is that as the winter arrives, these leaves will die back. And that will be the end of harvesting any leaves until next spring, once they return again. Now, as I alluded to earlier, comfrey feed does rather smell, and it becomes really quite pungent. So some gardeners just make it up and they leave it behind their shed. We happen to keep ours between the water butts because that's where we'll generally go to clearly fill the watering cans and add the feed. And while we're on the subject of that, when you want to start to use this next spring, whatever you're using to water your plants with, whether it be watering can or whatever, but you want 1 part comfrey to 10 parts water. Now, you will often see this referred to as Comfrey Tea, and it actually looks like tea, doesn't it? But make sure you keep it on the top shelves and away from any children that might be about, because it won't be that nice. And there are many other teas that you can make from within your garden. I've seen people that make nettle tea to feed their plants with. And if you search the internet or the rest of YouTube, I'm sure you'll find people that will tell you all about various different weeds that you can make feeds with. And I think it's really interesting that that's the case, because we all think of weeds as something that are an absolute blind nuisance. But actually, if you're pulling these and being able to make feed from them, that's a really great thing, isn't it? So it's something that I'd like to know a little bit more about, and I'll do some research on those dark winter nights that are fast approaching us. We shall see you on the next video.